Hey, Stacey David here with Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is about all things automotive from any time, any place, and beyond. All right, let's get to it. All right, I have got a question here from Toby. And Toby says, hey, what is the difference between using aftermarket parts or original parts? And which one should I use? And then he goes on to say that he has a 67 Mustang here, and it's got all original accessories on the engine. And he's wondering if he should keep those and restore them or if he should upgrade. Really good question. A lot of people run into this, and a lot of people spend money in the wrong direction if they're not careful. So let's walk through this a little bit. Okay, if you have an original car like that, and it's important that it stays original and all the numbers match, and maybe it's a 67 Shelby or something where that originality has a value to it, then by all means you should keep the original parts, restore them, keep the numbers matching, and make it work. Because part of the value is in the originality. As you do that, though, keep in mind that if you have air conditioning, that's the old R12 system, so you'll have to, deal with that. You'll have to restore the old alternator. You have to restore the brackets, but not over-restore them. There's a whole mindset and a style that goes with that. On the flip side, if that stuff doesn't matter, well, by the time you would go through and restore all those original parts, you could almost buy a brand new accessory system from Holley or Vintage Air or any of these companies that have these accessory units, and you get modern accessories and you put them on your engine. And you're spending a little more. I mean, those accessory units are about $1,500, give or take, on how much polish and chrome you want on them. But now you have modern air conditioning compressors, modern alternators, modern power steering pumps, water pumps. I mean, you got all the good stuff there that is up to date. That then, if you're putting in a vintage air unit, now you have the right compressor. If you're putting on, a new wiring harness, you have the right alternator. If you're doing any kind of a resto mod or anything like that, this is the only way to go. But it's also something you need to consider if you're just going to build a nice, reliable driver. Because one of the things you have to remember is that things get better over time and old stuff starts to get obsolete. And even though you may not want to bring it up to date, sometimes you have to. Case in point. We were working on a 67 Jeepster convertible the other day for the show. If you haven't seen it yet, it'll be coming up and just doing a basic level 1 restoration on it. Well, I went down. I was keeping the original rear brakes, just the drum brakes. Come to find out that the drums are not available anymore. I couldn't get them anywhere. I couldn't even get them from Jeepster Man, who specializes in that. They're all on back order. Now, somebody will probably make them, but they're not available, for the most part. And the ones I had on there were too far gone to be turned. So I had to go on eBay and try to find, I finally found something that would work. But one of the things around that is we went ahead and did a disc brake conversion for the front of this Jeepster. And that put a modern OEM style brake on the front of this Jeepster, which means you can get parts for it. And that's a great upgrade. Now, one of the downsides to that kind of upgrade is that it won't fit your regular 15-inch wheel unless you use a spacer. If you don't want to use the spacer, then you got to jump up to a 17-inch wheel, which may not be a look that you like. So as you can see, there are concessions you need to make. There are compromises that you've got to make when you're upgrading things, but drivability, obviously is pretty important. So what I'm saying is there's options out there, but eventually you're going to have to upgrade something because parts just are not available anymore. Let me give you another example. The guys at Curry Enterprises are good friends of mine, and they used to take part of this great race that used to happen across the country. And the thing with the great race, I don't know if they still do it this way, but everything had to be pre-1920s. So this is all cars from the teens or whatever. It's awesome. And they're out there driving like this 1915 Ford or whatever it was. And they ran into trouble. The crank started leaking, and they pulled it apart on the side of the road, and the old seal was just an old leather seal. And they literally cut a piece off their belt and put it up in there and got the car running again. Now, as soon as they got back, the first thing they did was fix that properly. Now, do you think they put a leather seal back in there? No. They cut the motor and they modified it to where a modern seal would fit because it's just a better deal. It's just like if you have an old Model A or an old engine, old flathead, and you take it down, obviously you want to have the block milled, but then they'll also cut the valves to fit a modern valve and modern valve seals and seats so it will run modern unleaded gas. If you're going to drive the vehicles at all, you got to do that. And it just lets you enjoy the engine in a current environment. If you don't do that, can't drive it. Or you got to be pouring octane booster in it all the time. Same with you guys that are driving old Jeeps, old tractors, anything like that. If you're going to continue to use something, you need to modernize it some to be compatible with today's fuels and oils and that kind of thing. Think of it this way. I mean, if you had old oil that had been sitting there in cans since the 1920s or 30s, are you going to pour that into your modern engine? Well, if you do, you're crazy. I mean, there's been so many great innovations and modifications done to oils that modern oils are far superior to what they had back then, which is what you would want to use. And so it's the same thing with some of these old parts. So unless you're just going for that look, or if you're competing in something that requires that, like the Race of Gentlemen or something like that, then it's always better to upgrade to where you can keep things running. So my recommendation is if you have a vehicle, that you're going to enjoy, say you got that 67 Mustang, we'll go back to Toby's question, I would suggest doing all modern accessories, air conditioning, put a vintage air unit on that thing, do a one-wire alternator, get a nice power steering pump on there, upgrade that, upgrade your brakes to modern stuff, and enjoy that car. Drive it. You'll be much, much, much more happy with it. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we're talking about cars, obviously, and what it takes to restore them and everything. And, it dawned on me that one of the biggest issues that most people face when it comes to an automotive project is motivation and keeping their motivation up. So what I'm going to do is for the next few podcasts, I'm going to kind of give you just a motivational quote that hopefully will kind of help you, give you something to think about. And the first one that I'm going to do, on this podcast is one that everybody's heard before or a version of it, but it's a great reminder. And it's every journey starts with a first step. You're like, well, obviously it does. Well, when you think broadly, it doesn't seem that important. But when you're sitting there on the couch and you're thinking about that project out in the garage and you're looking at, oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff to do. Well, none of it is ever going to be done unless you get up off the couch and take that first step toward the garage. And if you approach everything you do on your project with that mindset, you'll get stuff done. Now, what you don't do, I've got to go out there and take my first step toward that Chevelle. That's too broad, man. You'll just sit right back down and grab a bag of potato chips. No, what you need to do is go, okay, my first step on that Chevelle is I need to get out there and raise the hood and change the oil. And you break it down into those little things, and each one of those is the step that I'm talking about. That's the first step I'm talking about. Not the broad step. Well, I got to walk toward the mountain. Forget that. That's overwhelming. You got to break it down into those pieces and then start moving forward on that. And that will keep you moving forward on your project. So keep that in mind.
A successful automotive project takes planning and organization. But instead of using an old tablet or notebook, there's the Gears Deluxe Project Planning Book. This was designed to help you lay out a project, the parts, the tools, costs, and keep it organized with colored tabs, a pouch for receipts, and even a place to attach photos. If you decide to sell the vehicle, it serves as a complete history of what's been done. If you have a project or plan on starting one, the Gears Project Planning Book is the best way to lay it out and make it happen.
All right, I've got a very interesting question here. This comes from Colby. He's up in Canada. And he says, hey, Stacey, I'm curious about your opinion on Dodge ditching the HEMI for the new inline-six Hurricane and Ford pushing the six-cylinder turbos over traditional V8 power. Listen, man, I don't have any problem with six cylinders, turbos, that kind of thing. It's kind of funny. It's kind of like the 80s all over again. If you guys weren't around when that happened, and even before, back in the 50s and stuff, there's always been this trend that comes along every once in a while. After V8s, people try to go to smaller, more affordable performance engines. So in the 80s, it was 4 cylinders with turbos and 6 cylinders with turbos, and there's nothing wrong with those. They do not take the place of a V8. And if you want a V8, there's only a V8 that's going to give you the power and the performance that you want out of a V8. Now, V8s come with a downside. They don't get as good a mileage and this and that. But there's just certain things that they're capable of that you're not going to get out of these smaller displacement engines. Same thing with the diesel. There's certain things that a diesel can do that a gasoline engine just can't do the same way. And there is a demand for that as well. When it comes to like the V6s and the straight sixes and that kind of thing, they're great engines. I mean, one of the best engines that Ford ever made was their straight six, and Chevrolet as well. Would I take it over a V8? Well, it depends on what I was using it for. There is a place for both of them. Now, going back to another part of this question, we have heard this many times. I remember in 2002 when the Camaro was canceled for the first time, and then it was brought back, and there's always the end of the V8 is in sight, and it always just keeps coming back. And part of that is there is a need for that style of engine. And another thing is, keep in mind, this is a consumer-driven market. It really doesn't matter what Ford, Chevy, and Dodge think or want. It really comes down to what you, the consumer, the buyer, wants. If you don't want to buy a six-cylinder vehicle, and you don't, and you keep your money, well, in a consumer-driven market, they either need to come out with a product you want to buy, or you'll go elsewhere. And somebody will offer the product you want. So it really is in the hands of the consumer. Now, if people stop buying V8s, well, they will become more scarce. But I'll tell you what will happen is that all of these trucks and all of these cars that have V8s in them are going to become very expensive as a used car. And any automotive company is going to take one look at that and go, something, we're missing a market. I'm telling you. And they will come out with it. For example, right now, a huge market that is not being tapped is the small truck market. I'm talking the market that used to be held by the Chevy S10 or the little Ford Ranger or even the little Dodge Dakota, those little trucks. Nobody's really making those. Somebody will come out with another little pickup, and they'll rip in that market for a time until people get tired of it and they'll move on to something else. I mean, the market is always moving. My big thing to you, Colby, on this question is, listen, there's great stuff coming out. I think the straight sixes that these guys are going to come out with are going to be good. If that's not what you want, don't buy one. Hold out for a V8. Find yourself a used one and keep that going. And eventually that market will return. It always does. All right, I've got a question here that comes from Hope. And she says, hey, I've got a question on my car. I'm looking to do exhaust upgrades to it with a catback system. And just wondered, is that something I can do myself? I've never really done it before, but I'd like to try it. Really good question. I mean, exhaust upgrades are one of the first and one of the most common upgrades that people do to their vehicles. Exhaust and then your air intake are usually the first couple of things that people look into doing. So to answer your question, yeah, this is something that you can do. You just need to know a couple of things. First of all, you're going to be up under the vehicle. So if you have a low car or whatever, keep in mind you're going to be up underneath it. So having some way to get it up in the air is mandatory. If you don't have that, then you'll need to take it down to a shop or to an exhaust place and have them do it for you. Another thing that I recommend, there's a lot of great exhaust companies out there, but some of them skimp when it comes to hardware. I'm not going to name any names because they change around, but when you think of your standard exhaust pipe clamp, you think of the U-bolt. You know the one I'm talking about. It's shaped like a U, and it's got the little clasp that goes on the bottom side, and you crank the 2 bolts on the bottom. Do not ever use these. That is as outdated as the Rubik's Cube. Stop it. Don't do it anymore. Well, the problem with this is what happens is you crank that down and it bends both pipes. It bends the outer pipe and it bends the inner pipe, and it puts a big groove in it. So if you ever need to take those pipes apart, it's almost impossible. You got to split the pipe. And not only that, but they don't seal that well. They're prone to leaking. So even if the kit you get comes with those, toss those, go down and buy the stainless steel band clamp. Now you can buy those. I've seen them at O'Reilly's. I've seen them at AutoZone. And of course, there's companies like Stainless Works where I get all of mine that are they're a high quality. They're about 2.5 inches wide, and it's just a band, a flexible band of stainless steel that goes around the joint, and it makes a nice seal. And as you tighten it down, it shrinks around that joint, and it's the best seal that you can get. They don't leak very rarely at all. And the thing is, if you ever want to take it apart, they don't crush the pipe. So all you do is take the band clamp off, and you can slide the pipes apart if you ever need to replace them or something gets broken or whatever. So you're not destroying your exhaust system. That's huge. That way you can try different exhausts. You can do that kind of stuff. And if you take it down to a shop, don't have them go, oh, yeah, well, we'll just weld that on there. Because if they weld it on there, that's permanent. And then if you ever change your mind or need another exhaust system, they got to cut it off and charge you to build a new exhaust system. So you want this stuff removable, and you want it to be good. Also, when you're looking at new headers, I don't think that's what you're after, but for those of you that are looking at headers, if you can get something with a ball-style steel instead of the old flange, like the 3-bolt flange, the ball-style seals are just fantastic for sealing. Not only do they seal well, but they're reusable over and over and over again. And they won't blow out and leak like the old traditional 3-bolt flange. Like I said, there's some great companies out there making really good products. I use Stainless Works on a lot of stuff. I've used MagnaFlow, Flowmaster, Flowtech. There's just a lot of great companies out there. So there's good products out there. So just do your research. And I'll tell you what, one of the things that I do really appreciate with most of these companies is that if you go to their website, they will have a sound indicator of what the mufflers sound like. Please listen to that and make a wise decision that you don't get something too loud for a daily commuter. Most people get in there and go, oh, the louder the better. And then they're sitting there in traffic at 30 miles an hour and the drone is so bad they can't think straight. So make sure that you don't get something that's too radical for something you're driving every day. And man, you'll have a great time. It'll be a great experience for you, and you'll have a great sounding car. Good luck to you. All right, that's our show for today, which means you need to get out there and start working on something. Spend some time turning wrenches. You'll love it. Also, make sure to check out our website, staceydavid.com. We got all kinds of new products, some great stuff there you're going to love. Also, make sure you check out our social media. That's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all at Official Stacey David. Our social media is where you're going to find all the bonus content, the giveaways, the contests, the trivia. We even have extra viewer projects that we show everybody to focus on what you're working on. YouTube is where you're going to be able to find all of our episodes of Gears, past, present, and future. I know a lot of you guys ask about that. That's where you can see them. All right, that's all we got. We'll see you next time.